Start my meeting by just sort of opening the floor to questions or contributions, which I will do today as well, and then I'll just gradually move on to subjects as I get pulled. So you can fire away with something or other.
What do you think with what's going to happen on Tuesday? Whether she might resign or not because they're saying
Content over everything!
I mean, you've spent all week hearing speculation about this issue as to what's going to happen when Theresa May lose the vote on Tuesday. So she's a loser, you know. She's finished. But of course, the walking dead don't necessarily die straight away. You know, it depends on the internal dynamics in the Conservative Party. The Conservative Party is ridden by contradictions about Europe, provoked the present crisis about Europe, and is now suffering the internal contradictions and consequences of that. And some people wrote to me this week and said, you know, why doesn't Jeremy Corbyn do more and so on? What they really mean is, why doesn't Jeremy Corbyn back Tony Blair's policy of recalling the referendum? Or, you know, they expect him to make some greater intervention. I believe, given... Bang, go past. They come every now and again. I believe that that more or less, given the internal contradictions inside the Labour Party, that Corbyn's played it pretty much about right. Because it's not our job to clear up the mess that they created in that way. Let them tear themselves apart. Our job is to point to an alternative social system that we would like to create. And that alternative social system must have an appeal for those who voted to leave the European Union and those who voted to stay in the European Union. Let me give you an indication. Someone wrote to me last week. He said, how on earth can Jeremy Corbyn negotiate a better deal than has already been done in 2 years, in a few months? How do you win concessions from your enemy? How do you win concessions to advance your rights and conditions? There's no magic to it. There's no secret potion to it. It is you mobilize the full force of the masses in order to achieve socio-economic change. That's how you do it. And you want an illustration of it? An illustration? I'll give you two. One historical, one present. You only have to cast your eyes across to the events in France to understand how you win concessions. How do you progress the rights of the people? Every single right we have, the right to speak in Hyde Park, the right to organise, to combine, the right to trade unions, the right to vote, the right to strike, the right to demonstrate, the right for women to vote, equal rights for different nationalities, for different skin colours, different sexualities. These rights have come by struggle. That is the basic law of humanity in the modern era. We win things by struggle, not by negotiating and chatting and chitting about this and that and this or that minuscule amendment, adjustment. That's not what we're after. We're not after a compromise agreement with the European Union. We are after a different Britain and a different Europe. One based on the rights and interests of the overwhelming majority of society. For the many, not the few. It's not a slogan. It is a fundamental principle of policy. Our objective in the European Union and in relation to the European Union must be to put forward demands, policies, programs, strategies that raise the living standard of the British and, yes, the European masses. This is France we're talking about. where they're demonstrating and protesting. What is the universal thread of this demonstration of protest? That the massive majority of the people are not having their interests listened to. Listened to. They're not defending the rights of the people, but the rights of millionaires, billionaires, plunderers, robbers, thieves, who've got their finger in the pie right across the European Union, and yes, in Britain. Brexit, no Brexit, yes, there are crooks. Yes, there are thugs. Yes, there are billionaires who plunder and rob from society. They buy houses, leave them empty. Westminster and Mayfair, the number one on the Monopoly Board, has the largest number of empty properties in the whole of Britain, per square mile. And yet they're the most expensive. The City of London, the biggest conduit of criminal money in the world. And only a couple of days ago, after, by the way, I mentioned this 2 weeks ago at Speaker's Corner, and it was broadcast on the internet, suddenly Theresa May discovers there's this permit that they allow. In other words, talking about immigration. I said last week, or the week before, there are no limits on immigration if you're wealthy. So in other words, the whole issue of Brexit does not affect the wealthy. Now, because of that, the Theresa May's government changed their regulations last week, and they said, okay, you're no longer allowed to come Britain just because you're wealthy. Although that's just a con. Because there are a million ways, if you have sufficient capital, that you can go to any country. You don't have to come to Britain. You pay, I think it's £1 million in Malta, £50,000 in Portugal investment, Germany 250,000, something like that. There are a million ways to come in. If you've got money, if you've got capital, you've got resources, then even the biggest gangsters in the world find their way into London. And that's why the property prices are so high in London. Because international gangsters and crooks put their money in property in England as a money laundering scam.
Move up north, it's fabulous.
What do you say?
Move up north, it's great.
Why? I don't have anything against the north. A bit cold for me, but otherwise, that's just my London. What's that? Are you yellow shirt? Sorry, go on. Why not what? Because the government, and unfortunately a significant part of the Labour Party parliamentary party, and unfortunately the Liberal Democrats, historically have developed their relationship to the upper stratum of society as if they are brothers and sisters. So they swim in the same sea with each other. They have the same friends, family, clubs, hotels. They hang out together. Their lives, their aspirations, their mindset, their children go to the same schools. 8 schools provide the overwhelming majority of people go to Oxford and Cambridge. Oxford and Cambridge provide the overwhelming majority who become barristers or become members of parliament. Barristers and members of parliament shape the law and create the law and determine the outcome of the law. The heads of the police, the heads of the army, the heads of judiciary, heads of the Air Force, heads of the Navy, heads of the universities, heads of the companies are all swimming in the same sea together. And against them, the dirty, uncleaned masses. 42% of the population of London have less than £100 in savings. 60% of the British population, less than £1,000 in savings. At the same time, 8 people, according to Oxfam, 8 people own more wealth than half of the world. 3 people in America, according to Credit Suisse Wealth Report last week, 3 people in America own more wealth than the poorest half of America. 150 million people in the wealthiest country in the world, less wealth than 3 people. That is why they do what they do. They are servants, members of parliament, for most of the time, before they're elected. They will come to you and say, 1 minute. They will come to you and say, vote for me, I'll defend your interests. But once they're in Parliament, they defend the interests of the wealthy and the powerful. 90% of the time, and only when we protest do they 10% of the time do something for the people. That's how they live and think. That's why they behave that way. Is that a reasonable answer for you? Yeah? I mean,
Who controls the media?
oh, are
in
you
America?
coming into this meeting to take
Who
over, are
controls
you?
the media? There's 6 media corporations in America. All 6 are Jewish. All 6. They're more
Please,
powerful.
I thought you were on the Tommy Robinson
No, I
demonstration.
don't support Tommy Robinson.
There's one
You're
for you
afraid of
today.
him. You're
They've laid
afraid
one
of
on for
him
you. I'm not
because
afraid of
he
him.
gets the truth out.
Look,
He
they had
gets the truth
2,000 people here. I stood right in the middle of them and got pulled down, attacked and punched.
Why did
right?
you go
when
over
you were
to that
cowering in the
area?
corner going,
you
Tommy,
were
Tommy.
hoping that would happen. You
I
went
was
in
going to
there.
that area because
You
I've been
were-
speaking in Speaker's
Why
Corner
don't you-
32 years and I'm not giving up Speaker's
I've been
Corner to a load of
36
thugs,
years.
gangsters and crooks,
Tommy Robinson
right-wing
people
morons
never caused
paid by the
trouble with
American
me.
ruling class.
Listen,
I'm not
They've never
giving
caused
space
trouble.
to them. That's why.
Hey, why not? Tommy, my relatives are Chinese.
Oh,
They
good for
went to
you.
Trafalgar
Go
Square.
on.
They met EDL
Look,
people,
look.
and
You've got nothing to say for yourself.
were really polite. They were really polite people, and you're making out they're thuggish.
My
My
friend,
Chinese
my friend.
relatives,
Speaker.
my Chinese relatives know you're telling lies because
Oh,
they were
good for
treated
them.
with respect by the
Good
EDL.
for them, my friend. Oh, really, really, you don't want.
by those Stokes.
Pardon?
But bricks thrown in my head by those Stokes, man.
I can't even understand what you're saying.
Well, too
I
bad,
can't
mate, too bad. Go somewhere where you can, where you can get your audience, get your little platform, go up and speak. You don't have to annoy me and
No, I'm
everybody
not
else.
annoying you, I'm getting
You are
the truth
annoying me.
out.
How do you
I
know
get
how I'm
the truth.
annoying
I
you?
get the truth.
You are annoying me.
Listen to you.
The truth
Okay.
is more important. You always
No,
have
no,
to
you are
try-
annoying me.
Listen to
You
you.
are
Try
annoying me,
and
and
find
you're
the
saying
truth.
nothing.
It doesn't matter whether it
You see,
upsets you.
there
The
was
truth is important.
there was a great German philosopher who summarised what I know of you from 15 years at Speaker's Corner, and that is he used the phrase "from nothing, with nothing, to nothing." That's you.
No, it isn't. I am against monopoly capitalism. I'm against unjust wars. I'm against the Gulf War, against the First World War, against the Second World War,
right,
against the Falklands War, against every
for-
war.
he's for
Because
coming to my meeting and
I'm
talking
a
shit.
nationalist. You support a revolution in Russia, a civil war. That's the war, brother against brother. That's
So-
what you
so
support.
my point
I
was-
don't support civil
You
war.
see, the gentleman here talks a sort of nonsensical
So it's
stupidity.
nonsensical to be against the civil war, is it?
Can I answer you? Or
It's not
or
nonsensical.
are only you allowed to
No,
speak?
why do you insult
Are
me
only
by
you
saying
allowed
it's
to
not-
speak?
No, why do you say it's nonsensical?
Are you allowed to speak?
No, why are you saying it's nonsensical?
I have to
Why do
answer
you
the-
have to insult
Have you got any
people?
other 1,000
No,
questions you
why
want
do
to
you
ask
have to
me?
insult people?
I don't have to insult people,
No,
but
you
you're an
do
exception.
insult- I'm an exception because
Yes,
I
you are
get
an
too near the
exception.
truth.
No, because
too near the
you're
truth.
one of these people who've come up to Speaker's Corner about 15 years ago. You've been-
36 years ago,
started speaking here.
I started
Okay,
speaking.
36 years ago.
30.
And
There's
you've
a
been
difference.
talking shit for 90% of the time.
I've been
You
against
occasionally
the Gulf
wander
War.
around
I've been
Speaker's
against
Corner,
the Gulf
pick up
War.
things from one
I've
other
been against
person.
the-
You're never capable of listening to someone reply to you. As soon as someone replies, you intervene and interrupt. You were arguing, the only positive thing about him from his own point of view is he has been arguing for Brexit for a long time. Now the Brexit vote happened, he's pleased as punch. It doesn't make his argument any more coherent. You can have the best position in the world that corresponds to reality. For example, you could say E equals MC squared. You could come out with Einstein's brilliant formula. Does that make you as clever as Einstein? No. So basically, if you... That's a great song. Oh, I see. Okay. So it's the red flag, my friend.
The red
It's not
flag
mine,
of
first of all.
class
Oh, go
hatred.
away.
The red flag. I
Sorry.
used to be a communist
Why don't you
for
go
10 years.
away?
I know all
Go
about
away.
your group. I
Go on,
used to
go
be in
away.
your group. Class hatred.
Why don't you go away?
Go away and don't come
I
back.
used to be a member of those
I'm just
groups.
waiting for
I
him to
know,
leave.
That's why you're afraid. Yes, they're all afraid of the
Are you
truth.
going to leave?
I can leave.
Look, you're always doing this, right?
What?
You're going. "Ah, blah, blah, blah,
Yeah.
blah, 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 blah.
No, I
Ah,
don't.
blah, 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 blah.
I don't.
Ah, blah, blah, blah,
What I do-
blah, 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 blah.
Look, is this an intelligent looking
fuck
person?
is that?
Is this
you.
an intelligent looking person?
That's
You're
you.
acting like a monkey.
Well, that's how I'm just
No,
impersonating you, my
you're the
friend.
one acting like that.
No,
You're the one.
Uh,
You're the monkey. You're acting like a
Eliza, leave him, let him go, let him go.
No, no.
Are you going now?
I have a.
Are you going now?
Where does he stand? Is he a socialist?
Well, what do you want to know for?
Because it's friggin' annoying, that's why.
Well, that's Speaker's Corner.
No, it's not Speaker's Corner, it's you. It's not Speaker's Corner. Speaker's Corner and freedom of speech are confused nowadays in people's minds. Tommy Robinson comes down here with 1,000 or 2,000 thugs,
They're not
and
thugs,
anyone
they're
who disagrees with them,
working class
they
people.
punch and kick.
Oh, yeah,
They
you
punch
went there
and kick
knowing
and
the big
declare,
trouble.
where's my
Come
freedom
on,
of
dear.
speech?
Come on.
Tommy Robinson's supporters have been coming down here since March,
Yeah.
and they've been coming
But no
down
trouble.
here.
Trouble.
They've been coming down
No
here.
trouble. They don't cause any trouble.
I'm sorry,
They don't
I'm
cause
sorry.
any trouble. They don't
Tan,
cause-
for example. One of these people, our friend here declares, don't cause any trouble.
No, they don't.
Came down here, gets a Koran, runs in the middle of the Islamic or the Muslim meeting, throws the Koran on the floor, threatens to have a cartoon competition, then shouts out, then endlessly shouts out the N-word in front of black people. That is what they think is freedom of speech. And this goon thinks that interrupting people when they're speaking at Speaker's Corner to people who voluntarily have gathered around there to listen to that person
I'm trying to
speak,
get the
they
truth.
think that permanently interrupting that person is free speech.
Oh, do they?
No, your mindset and behaviour is an attempt to destroy free speech,
No, it's not.
to defend free
Everybody,
speech.
Absolute free
everybody here has their own
There is no
reason.
such thing as absolute free speech.
Everybody has
As
a
far
reason.
as call to, stopping at violence, it's the call to violence. Obviously,
What?
Yeah?
What?
Stopping at the call to violence, obviously. Yeah?
What?
Stopping at the application of violence.
No, my friend.
Yes, my
If
friend.
30 people stand around one person, let's say there's a 70-year-old woman standing on a platform speaking in Hyde Park, and I knew an 82-year-old woman who used to speak here, Charlene. Now, she spoke here from the 1960s until the 1990s. But if she's standing and speaking, and 5 great big burly guys are shouting at full voice against her,
They have
has
that
she got
right.
freedom of speech?
This is freedom.
When I
Has
was
she got freedom of
25
speech?
years old,
Has she?
I had 8 Muslims
you're
shouting
discriminating.
"Allah
Oh,
Akbar."
That is not freedom of speech.
8
She should be
Muslims
treated
shouting
differently because she's a
"Allah
woman.
Akbar."
And because
Me,
she's
So
a
you
I was
think that's the right
75
thing to do,
years.
do you?
Say it properly.
So you think that's the right thing to do, is it?
But
No.
What are you talking about then?
No, Allah
So
Akbar
you're
is a
confirming
threat.
what I'm saying.
No, Allah
So you're
Akbar is a
confirming
threat.
what I'm saying.
Allah Akbar is a threat. When 8 Muslims chant
burly men to
Allah
the
Akbar at me, say it properly, you prick. When they chant Allah Akbar, that is a
You want to
threat.
carry your meeting
You're
on here
freedom
or
of
somewhere
speech.
else?
Get out of here, you
working
class Tory. You're scab traitor.
He's not working class.
I care more about this
It's very good that you're using your freedom of speech to
Get off, Mr. Bumble. Get
No,
out of
I
here.
carry on.
Your freedom of speech, Mr. Bumble, you got it. He is. He's a mouthpiece for the capitalists. That's what he is.
Okay, I've never met him before, I don't think. Maybe I've seen his face somewhere, I don't know. Looks like someone had a Victoriana.
Freedom of speech, I'll give you freedom of speech.
I guess he's into that.
can't even hear himself.
You're just annoying, you're annoying and ignorant.
You interrupted.
Now,
I was trying to give a serious speech and people
what was I saying earlier on?
Told him what you were saying.
Kyle, honestly, he's about to leave. He's got nothing more to say. Leave him to go.
Being against the war.
Does anybody want this guy stuck in a meeting for the rest of the time?
No, thank you.
Right, thank you.
I don't need you to preach at us. You don't have to, we can actually respond to you. This is not like you're not on a pulpit in a church.
He's an ignoramus. He's got nothing.
Sorry, how long have you been coming here?
I've been here a couple of times. Does that matter?
Yes, because the comment you made is as if
He's never changed
you're telling me how to speak.
No, I can respond to you what you say.
Well, but that's not what you said. You said it's the method by which I'm speaking something
You
wrong.
want to speak to us like you're in a pulpit. In a
I want to
church.
speak to you as I wish to speak to you.
And do
That's
so,
how I
yes.
do. So
And I
I've
respond
been
as
speaking
well.
here 32 years. And in my experience, there are times when you can speak in a calm and quiet way, and there are other times where you have to speak loudly, other times when you have to insult someone, other times when you welcome everybody in. It's the nature of Speaker's Corner. You have to judge the audience and the people who are heckling and intervening as they are there and then. Sometimes, I know from Speaker's Corner, I've been speaking at Speaker's Corner 32 years, sometimes someone who really likes you will start an argument with you about nothing. People have all sorts of things happen to them in their lives before they come to Hyde Park on a Sunday afternoon. Other times you'll have someone who completely disagrees with you, like happened to me a couple of months ago. That is the leading Conservative who's been coming to Speaker's Corner since the 1980s, since before I was here, Matthew Palmer, who many of us can't stand, but that's another matter. He came up to me and he thanked me for what I did when Tommy Robinson came up. He said, it was a good thing you did, thank you very much, he shook my hand. Shocked me. So there's all sorts of different backgrounds, conditions and circumstances. I am speaking to an audience where some faces are clearly recognisable to me. Other faces are unknown to me. So I'm dealing with different layers and different people with different backgrounds and people with different experience of the environment at Speaker's Corner. Added to this is the fact that Speaker's Corner has now become an internet sensation since about 6 months ago. And therefore, whatever happens at Speaker's Corner is broadcast to tens of thousands of people. And therefore, I have to take account of that now. I have to be a bit more careful about what I say. I have to be a bit more convincing in the arguments I make. And I have to consider that the audience watching there is much bigger than the audience watching here. So the dynamic is slightly different. So I adjust myself from my experience with oratory to find a medium path between those things. Now, are there any questions from the audience to bring us back on track?
What was the track?
I don't know. Where were we? Anyone, ladies and gentlemen, fire away.
What were
just
you
ask
talking
anything?
about? I've just arrived.
Let's just talk about the efficiency of socialism versus capitalism. Let's talk about how they're inefficient.
This is not a seminar room.
I did a little radio show
Well,
with
no,
you
but I mean,
last
he's
week,
educated,
actually.
so like I want to have his opinion. So keep your
I did a
opinion.
little radio show with you. It was a nice little piece I got from it. I'll send you a link to it if you like. Now, you wanted to know again? Pavel, do you mind?
Well, you have a PhD you have a PhD, right?
My PhD is in Chinese political economy.
Okay, so you know a lot about communism.
I'm Dr. Khoo, and that's my speciality.
Cool. So I'm
My
interested.
speciality is the distinction between capitalism and non-capitalism,
Okay.
but in relation to China. That's my PhD. So what was your question?
So I want to know about from my
Oh, the efficiency.
Pardon? Yeah. So from my kind of like layman's perspective, it seems like when you remove the profit incentive, that economies become less efficient. So businesses.
I remember last week we came
less
to some
productive.
agreement on some points. In particular, I pointed out that it is my view that the basic elements of society that constitute, or driving force that constitutes capitalism, is commodity production for profit. The production of goods and services for sale on the marketplace. Sorry, would you mind? I know you're a distance away, but I can hear you constantly saying what you're saying. If you moved either 5 meters further back or you didn't, it would be easier to speak. That's all. It's not. I really don't mind you arguing, but it's constant in my ear when I'm trying to think, and it's difficult. I really don't mean to stop you. No, but you're going to like this bit because it's all about capitalism, socialism, and efficiency. So I'd also welcome you into that discussion. Capitalism, socialism, and efficiency. That was what he wanted to deal with, yeah? Now, the argument is that because capitalism mobilizes capital, money, to invest as rapidly as they feel is possible to achieve a profit as fast as possible, Capitalism is an enormously dynamic economic system. Fact. Right? I'm not denying that.
Agreed.
Because if I think there's a demand for ice creams in the audience, unlikely this time of year, then I could buy the ice creams and sell them all here and make money quickly. Right? Hot weather, that would be the case. Cup of tea, probably more likely now. Right? So the potential is there. Now, then there's the question, once you get companies, capitalist companies, competing one against another in the marketplace, there tends to be a process which is visible in the game Monopoly and visible in the world we live in, where 780 companies control 80% of world trade. 140 companies control 40% of world trade. Study by Vitali, New Scientist, about 5 years ago. Because of that, and we're in Britain, 150 companies control 70 to 80% of the stock market valuation in Britain. You have a tendency towards the concentration of wealth and thereby of power in the hands of a few companies whose market dominance means they can set prices themselves above the actual value of the commodity. They can set the price like OPEC sets the price of oil, or like large-scale landowners, let's say, Company Town, can rent out at the price they want, or the large supermarkets, 4 of which control high street shopping in Britain, can dominate the market structure, not only of the commodities sold in supermarkets, but also of the supply chains, going back to the farms, right across the entire planet. And therefore, capitalism, as it becomes older, becomes more and more monopolized, oligopolized, and concentrated. The consequence of that is you have vast amounts of capital at the disposal of a very small number of people and companies. The consequence of that is that capitalism no longer functions as a free market system that it theoretically is when it functions efficiently and effectively. Instead of this, you have a monopolized system. The monopolized system, the guy earlier on, remember he says, monopoly capitalism, monopoly capitalism. Monopoly capitalism is the reason why the First World War happened. Because the monopoly capitalists, based in Germany, England, Belgium, France, and the United States, to a lesser degree in Japan, wanted to subdivide the world, which they controlled without the right to vote, without the right to strike, without the right to national independence. Britain had a colonial empire spanning the world to defend its monopoly capitalists. The monopoly capitalists were established right the way back Queen Elizabeth's time. You remember the Royal Africa Corporation that dealt in slaves was given special permission by Her Majesty Elizabeth I, with Francis Drake, the great British hero, standing behind it all, to organise the world slave trade to accumulate capital, pump back into London, and allowing the formation of the elementary basis for monopoly capitalism, which became more and more and more concentrated, such that 3 people in America now own more wealth than half of America, 150 million people in the richest country in the world. And therefore, understanding monopoly capitalism allows you to understand socialism. Socialism is the recognition that monopoly capitalism is not free market capitalism.
Agreed.
It's got nothing to do with free market capitalism. It's the consequence of that system in real life, producing monopolized structures of power which dominate the national countries and then dominate those national countries, then in turn dominate the world. So Britain, through its colonization of the fifth of the planet in 1947, laid the material basis for its global role that continues to this. That's why Boris Johnson and Sir Jacob Rees-Mogg think they live in some colonial era. leave the European Union, regain the colonies. This type of mindset lies behind their thinking.
I think I need to correct something.
Go on.
First and foremost, economic systems are not just only social or capitalistic.
And not just what?
The only economic systems that exist are not just the socialist economic system and the capitalist
No,
economic
true.
system.
He didn't say that.
You have a loud voice, please use it, uncle.
I'll use it. The types of economic systems that exist are not just socialist economic systems and capitalist economic systems. You see, I think we need to remove the facade that there is some capitalist system. There isn't. What exists is a pseudo-feudal modernized system. That is what exists.
These are terminological questions.
No, there's a reason for it.
They are terminological questions.
Yes,
you have to specify what you mean
let me specify.
to give that substance. Otherwise, it's just a term.
Let me specify clearly what I mean. What I mean is this.
Louder, please.
What I mean is this.
Yes.
The stock market, as far as I'm concerned, is just a wise way to try to gain creative capital, because the agrarian land ownership system of feudalism suddenly became passe, suddenly became old. Before, they could keep everybody controlled, because if you don't own the land, you control the economy. But when machines came into operation, when other technologies, when capital came into operation, that is why it's called the capital market. Something had to be created.
So you're explaining something, or you're talking? Giving
I
a
am
talk?
explaining something. I'm explaining that the feudal lords of old and their financial resources is what actually, and I really respect what you said, that the stock market and the structure of monopoly that the stock market brings into place, that a few then end up buying most of the companies and owning the capital. That's what happens. So let's not look at the stock market and the monopolistic capitalism and the so-called free market. There is no...
One minute. The question I was asked was something which I haven't answered yet,
Go ahead,
which I'll
sir.
try to answer, and I'll come back to your question then.
Go ahead, sir.
So the question was asked about efficiency of socialist or capitalist economy. I was explaining that capitalism inevitably ends up as a monopolistic or oligopolistic system of economic power. The consequence of that is that you have wars, national conflicts, and so on. Now, the First World War being what the Marxists like myself would call the first imperialist war, a product of the globalization of capital under monopoly control. Now, that also signifies, in my opinion, the preparation within the economy for a new type of society in which monopoly is socialized. So in other words, we take over the largest banks and the biggest companies and make them publicly owned. By publicly owned, I mean belonging to the people, not shareholding public ownership. Belonging to the people, in Britain that would entail today 150 companies that control 70 to 80% of the stock market valuation. There are 6 million companies in Britain. I'm talking about nationalising the largest 150 for the very simple reason that these companies operate in a way where they produce products for millions or even billions of people, and yet the accumulation of wealth that comes from the production by tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people to produce 4 billion of people, the accumulation of resources that comes out of that is private. It goes into private hands for the reproduction of the dominance of monopoly capitalism.
Why is that bad?
Let me just finish at one point here. So the efficiency of capitalism is limited by its monopolistic tendencies. The efficiency of socialism at the initial stage, before it has reached the level of technology, science and culture of capitalism, which to date it has not done anywhere, until such a stage, monopoly ownership, socialist monopoly, is a precondition for developing efficiency. Let me explain with one example. In the People's Republic of China today, China is catching up with and overtaking many capitalist countries precisely because The largest companies in China are publicly owned monopolies.
I would disagree with that.
So well, you can disagree, but let me just clarify why. So, when you use a mobile phone in China, the mobile phone companies are state-owned companies. The money you pay every month to the mobile phone company is state money. The money for the infrastructure, for the roads, for the railways, for the airports, for the airlines, for the railway companies, for the train building companies, for the technology, the biggest technology parks, for the building of housing for the people. The international plan called Belt and Road, the biggest state investment program in world history, the biggest elimination of poverty in the last 30 years of any country in world history. All this is due to the monopolistic power of the state in China. That is why a socialist element emerged out of that, even though it's not as efficient as an individual private company, as a totality. By pooling the resources together, they are more efficient than capitalism. That is why China is catching up with and overtaking capitalism.
Now, let me give you, there's a case study of something that is more efficient than both the capitalist system and the socialist system. I would recommend you look at the case study of a part of Nigeria. In the 1950s, there was a part of Nigeria where health was free, education was free. The ordinary farmer became very rich rapidly simply because of a government structure that allowed the farmer to have his own private capital, but represented the farmer at international trade levels. Okay. So that his interest, commodity price management, in his interest, was managed by the government. See, the issue there was this: the asset, the capital of production, the cocoa, let's just say cocoa tree, the cocoa and the cocoa bean that was produced belonged to the farmer.
Well, I don't have any problem with that. In fact, if you look at Marx, that's the example he's giving.
Wait a minute, let me finish the point. The point is this: who owns the asset when a socialist government structure exists? And when a capitalist structure exists, who ends up monopolizing the assets? Those are two important questions.
Well, let's deal with the first part first of all. I don't know if you were happy about the efficiency thing, though, for the time being.
It was about the Chinese thing, about how China is now jumping over us. I don't think that's down to socialism at all. I mean, there's lots of other examples, like, for example, in the United States, for example, they industrialized much faster than the United Kingdom because we took 200 years to achieve industrialization, whereas the United States were able to just use our technology and jump on board. I think that the similar effect is happening in China.
That is obviously. I'll come back to you in one second. Yeah. That's obviously an important component of China's development,
as far as importance,
as it has been in every country. It's known in Marxist language as combined and uneven development. There is always uneven development in the world, but then what happens is people assimilate the latest technology and sciences from the world and apply them on a large scale. The large scale of application, however, in China is because the state is the monopolist, and therefore they can introduce on a large scale in ways that private companies will not do. That's why the largest infrastructure project in the history of the world is being initiated by China rather than America, although America did do that after the Second World War for fear of revolution in Europe, because they thought people would support the Soviet Union. Coming back to the point you were making. Now, in relation to agriculture, and that's why I asked you about the terminology you were using earlier on. In relation to agriculture, those who argued for universal collectivization in the Soviet Union and in China were wrong. And they were wrong from the beginning. And in fact, Marx had argued right back in the 1860s that the only way the capitalism, he said, is unable to develop large-scale farms, unable to develop effective agriculture. And so he said either he advocated, better said, he said either a small-scale cooperatives or private hand of the farmer, the farmer proprietor, is necessary to develop small-scale agriculture and productivity. And if you like, the 40 years, I think it's today, 40 years ago, the Chinese adopted a policy similar to that, the agricultural production did rise quite significantly. However, it came to limitations in the mid-1980s because you also needed large-scale development of infrastructure to integrate together the whole of the country, which was separated by tiny, rugged roads that couldn't be connected.
And that's what governments do.
That's right. So in that way, just the same as a cooperative in Britain, large-scale farming, is served by cooperative industry. And in many countries in Europe, it's the same thing. Because the individual farmer cannot themselves play that role on the grand market. And because capitalism treats farming like the paid whore of capitalism, that's why they need to, if you like, maintain this relationship. They have to sustain the food supply in their country. Otherwise, they're threatened by revolution at any time. And that's why in Britain, you look around, there's farms everywhere. They're earning £25,000 a year in income officially. Same in Germany, same in France. The only reason they survive is because they get massive subsidies. They get subsidies for leaving the land fallow. They get subsidies for killing a sheep. They get subsidies for having a sheep. They get subsidies for buying fertilizer. You name it, they get subsidies. They are the biggest subsidised sector in Britain, apart from the monopolistic sector paid and subsidised by the National Health Service. They get another subsidy from the British public because pharmaceutical companies, well, you get a prescription, an old woman pays £4 or pays nothing and gets drugs worth £10,000. And that money's paid by the government to make up the difference in order to subsidise large-scale pharmaceutical companies, and many people in the British Parliament are directors of these companies. So it's no wonder that they get special handbacks and feedbacks. The question is this that I'm raising. We do not require public ownership of fish and chip shops, of farms. We don't require public ownership of estate agents and taxi drivers. But we do require public ownership of the information infrastructure. Otherwise, people like Steve Bannon and people like Cambridge Analytica, who he was working for, and people like Facebook. He was planning to stand for president of America. Did you know that? Zuckerberg, he wanted to. He was just when the Cambridge Analytica information came out, he was planning a 50-state tour with his wife to stand for president of America. With all the information infrastructure of every single American at his disposal to help him. Hardly a democratic structure. Yes, I'll take you one sec. No, go on.
What's the incentive? Why would people do this? Like, people who are in charge of these big companies, there's no incentive to get it.
There was the only serious, coming on to the question the gentleman here raised, so I was just about to talk about what you want. Never mind. The only serious academic debate on the merits of socialism or capitalism as economic efficiency was held in the 1930s, and it was between the famous economist who later became Margaret Thatcher's guru, and that is Hayek, and then there was Mies, and then on the other side there was a man by the name of Oscar Lange. Now their argument was called the socialist calculation debate. Can socialism be as efficient as capitalism? That was the question that was posed. Mies and Hayek said, only a private incentive-driven action and private decisions by consumers to decide what they buy or they don't buy can effectively manage the sheer scale of information potential that you need to gather together to decide what to produce, where to produce, when to produce, and so on. Right. So the flexibility of the market system was what Hayek and Mies were praising. Now they argued that there is no planning office, no bureaucratic apparatus that can possibly match the individual decisions by millions of people on a daily basis about what they will buy and sell. Therefore, only capitalism can function efficiently and effectively. That was their argument. They were countered by Oscar Lange, who later became a minister in the Polish government after the Second World War. And he argued that monopoly capitalism dominates the world today. Large companies dominating key markets who do not actually function in the same way as Alan Sugar's market stall capitalist that they like to make out controls the world. Instead of this, you have banks pension funds, large companies,
trust funds.
and multi-billionaires who own the shares and stocks of the largest companies. And these companies, in them you have the shareholders, a tiny group at the top, then you have CEOs, then you have managers, upper level managers, then you have lower level managers, then you have the mass of the workers. So in companies that, where you have 200,000 workers, you have a hierarchy of power with a very tight hierarchy. Just one sec, you'll follow my argument, one sec. A hierarchy at the top which administers the decisions. Therefore, there is a removal, this is what Langer explained, a separation between the actual interests of the profit-seeking owners seeking a higher return on investment and the functional managerial strata who actually administer the day-to-day operation of the company. And those people, therefore, are not profit-driven organisers of the economy. They are instead bureaucratic managerial elites. And that bureaucratic managerial elite is no different in principle in a publicly owned entity as in a privately owned entity. And therefore they can respond to price responses in the following way. If everybody says we want Rolls Royces, then you push billions of dollars, if you wanted to, into Rolls Royce production, and the price of Rolls Royces falls. If on the other side, the demand for red buses with an opening back where you walk inside without a ticket, without paying or showing your ticket, then you can throw, if you don't want them, then you withdraw finances from that. The price of them will go up until such time as the market equilibrates around that. So he explained that you can perfectly well have a perfectly functioning financial response and price response mechanism within a planned economy that monopolises the dominant sections of the economy. Added to that is the very simple idea that the larger production becomes, it crosses national boundaries. And national boundaries exist because capitalist countries have interests to defend their own position of wealth and power. The British ruling class wants to defend its land, its ownership, its houses, its relations, its power. They want to defend that above that of Germany or Italy or Russia or China. And therefore the ruling classes in each country are national ruling classes. However, the world economy is organised internationally. So you have a global division of labour to produce this jacket, a global division of labour to produce this ladder. Every single commodity you'll see in the shops, there's a global division of labour. Workers in Pakistan, in India, in Africa, in Asia, all in some way adding something to the production of the commodity, from the mobile phone to the pair of socks you wear. And therefore, only the international organisation of the world, only the global organisation of production, distribution and exchange will overcome the contradictions that are coming to the head at the present time. What do I mean by contradiction before I take you? One, the tendency during boom to link together the world. The tendency during economic crisis for the world to break apart. That's what we're seeing now. That's why Brexit, that's why Trump, that's why the European Union itself is beginning to disintegrate. Because when there's enough money, the whole family's happy, the kids are smiling, we can have a nice Christmas dinner. When there's no money, we can't buy presents for the kids. One kid complains the other one's got more, punches the other in the face. The husband says the wife's no good. She can't cook properly because we can't afford to buy the latest machine that cooks the food properly. And therefore, once the economy turns down, everybody fights each other. And for 2 years, Britain has been sitting around the dinner table talking shit about Brexit versus Euro. Right? It's a sham. It conceals behind it the reality. The reality is living standards, conditions, the rights of the people. That's what's at stake. And alongside the attacks, the division, the great divisions, you find alongside those attacks, there's too many immigrants. Too many immigrants because the economy's going backwards. When the economy's going forward, come all ye faithful, joyful and triumphant, come to England. We can give you jobs. My father came here. When my father came from Malaysia, he's Chinese. He had a British passport. They had 600 million people. In 1948, 600 million had British passports in 1948. So what are they talking about? Can't come in, can't go out. Donald Trump, he says America, a country of 300 million people, the wealthiest country on the planet, enough nuclear weapons to blow up the world 100 times. Yet America, and with 3 people who own more wealth than half of the population, 150 million, yet America can't take 3,000 people walking from Ecuador. Really? Can't take 3,000. Instead of this, you need to send the army, the navy, the National Guard, and build a wall. Build a wall to defend America. Now he says, I see they arrested this Chinese leader of Huawei. They say, oh no, the Chinese, they've been installing secret bugs in your mobile phone, listening to you. What did Ed Snowden show? Ed Snowden showed Yahoo, Facebook, Hotmail, Google, they're all in the hand. They were hand in glove with the National Security Agency of the United States of America. They could turn on your mobile phone, listen to you, turn on your computer and watch you, and spy on everyone in the world. And then later use the information you gather by spying on the world to manipulate the votes in elections, like the Brexit vote, like the Donald Trump vote. And then they show them Russia. Russia killed someone in Salisbury. Okay, maybe they did. Those guys weren't convincing at all, I must say that. I didn't think he could have done it. I didn't think Russia had fallen so far, but so it has. And yet, so Russia is bad, although only sometimes. The Chinese are bad, arrest the CEO, or arrest one of the leaders of their companies. Meanwhile, the Saudi Arabians, they're fine. All they do is take journalists into their embassy for dinner, chop them into little pieces and drop them in a bath of acid. That's all they do. They're good allies of ours. For example, when we arm them to send weapons and bombs to drop on the people of Yemen, that's a good thing. And therefore, when these people talk, Brexit's good for you. The European Union's good for you. America's an ally of ours. Always watch out, because the chances are, unless you understand an outlook on the world that starts the other way around, not what they say, not what Theresa May says, or Amber Rudd says, or Boris Johnson says, but what the interests of the people are. That's the question we have to ask. And on that basis, once people wake up, like they did in France, once they wake up, they are not representing us. Then you begin to discover. And the same with Jeremy Corbyn. That's why he was elected. I remember when he first stood, it was 20-1 odds. I put £20 down straight away. And as an Italian man said, you're never going to win. He bet me another £20. I got another 200 quid out of him. Because the fact of the matter is, we required the expression. Archimedes once said, and I'll end on this, give me a fulcrum, a lever, and I will move the universe. Give me a point of reference, a place to stand, and I can change the universe. What did he mean? He mean when there's a focal point around which people mobilize, then you can transform the world. And we are in an era of dramatic, revolutionary changes, both for the good and for the bad. And therefore our main task is to prepare the ground for that. In my opinion, that means bringing down the government, getting a Labour government elected, and carrying through a policy that will not only be attractive to Remainers and Leavers in Britain, but also to the whole of Europe and the whole of the world. And in that way, to create a wedge between the upper layers of society, the monopolists, the capitalists, the gangsters, and the mass of the people of the entire world. Socialism is a worldwide project. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
I don't agree with you. But I love you anyway.
A people's champion. Oh my God. Thank you. I don't know if you remember me. I was with Piers Corbyn when we did the campaign for Labour. Yeah. How you doing, man? Yeah, I'm okay, comrades. So sorry about last year.
Cheers.
So sorry about last year.
Cheers.
You need a bigger platform, man.
Huh?
You need a bigger platform.
What we got? Plenty of people watching.
Bigger than that, man.
Well, we'll wait.
And you're amazing as well.
Can't take over everything from your melody.
God, man, say it straight. Man, don't listen to BBC. Man, don't listen to ITV. Listen. Man, don't listen to BBC. Man, don't listen to ITV. I don't even listen to Sky TV. I just listen to COE. Man, don't listen to ITV.
Sorry, bro. They have the same roots as a verb, but it is a noun.
Are we having a thing here?
Very. We are now. That's the size of this. Steve, what's up?
I'm sorry, the word Muslim is a noun. All right, the word footballer is a noun.